Okay, good evening, everyone, and then good afternoon if you're on the West Coast, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Jamie Adkins, the Vice President of Business Development for MedShiftRx, and we are very excited to share this webinar with you all, which is going to be focused on how you can go beyond just offering GLPs to truly optimize outcomes in your practice. And we are especially thrilled to be partnered with Aguirre Sciences, a leader in quality, compliance, and innovation in this space. So today you're actually going to hear from Heather Vermette. She's the president of Aguirre Sciences. She's going to share a little bit about what sets their manufacturing process apart and how their rigorous testing ensures the highest standards of product quality in the industry. But you're also going to hear from Dr. Derek De Silva, who's going to take a deeper dive into the peptide categories and strategies that can help you maximize this opportunity in your practice. So we're really going to be focused on the clinical side and the benefits of all of these great peptides. As we go forward today, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. And if anything comes up after today's session, the team at MedShiftRx is always here to support you, as are our partners at Aguirre as well. And all of the peptides discussed today are available on our marketplace. So, as a reminder, for those of you who are a little less familiar, we sell exclusively to clinicians and clinics, not to patients. And as a thank you for joining us, anyone who purchases within the next 72 hours will receive an automatic discount off their next purchase for 10%. So, we're going to be sending out those coupon codes shortly after the webinar, in addition to the recording. And then just to reiterate, at MedShiftRx, our goal really is to support your success through programs like this, through great education and resources. Our loyalty rewards program, which affords you more cash back on all your purchases, our price match guarantees, and also as it pertains to peptides, we provide dosing guides and on-demand C of A's. So really, we're trying to provide everything that you guys need to grow your aesthetic wellness and peptide business. So with that, I'm excited to turn it over to Heather from Aguirre Sciences. And thank you again for being here.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jamie. Pleasure to connect with all of you. We highly value this partnership. We're very selective on the partners that we work with. And so when this opportunity came up to be working with MedShift, we were absolutely thrilled. An outstanding reputation, know many of the people really well on the leadership team. So this is an excellent fit. And I know that they do a great job of screening the providers that they work with. And again, this is a clinician only. So we don't work with any groups that are direct to consumer. And so just to share a little bit about Aguirre Sciences, we've got many different verticals within our ecosystem. One of them is that we're doing some clinical trials. We're doing that in Mexico. We also have some operations in the Middle East. So everything that we're doing stateside here, we're doing in the Middle East through Dubai, as far as the API sales and the finished vials. And then the vials that you are buying are coming from our CGMP facility, which is also newly ISO 9001, which is very unique in this space. So back when we could all do peptides out of a 503A compounding pharmacy, those are registered, inspected, and regulated by each of the state boards. And then you've got your 503B, which is bulk office use. However, most of these peptides outside of Samoralin and when the GLPs are on drug shortage cannot be made in a 503B. So when these peptides were reclassified about 2.5 years ago, it created an opportunity really for groups like ours to do things and to do them the right way. So that's when we put together our CGMP facility, also being ISO 9001. So we started out as a chemical company, procuring chemicals, synthesizing chemicals, and then selling those to the compounding pharmacies. But there was such a need for the finished vial part of it for bulk office use for the physicians, and then we got into that space. So all of the same chemicals that we are selling to the compounding pharmacies, so they would have the material safety data sheets and the C of A's with everything, is what we're doing through Aguirre Sciences. So we've got everything in that ecosystem there. So sort of a closed loop. So we can really ensure that you're getting the best quality product. Our new facility is registered with the FDA. We go stringent inspections on that. We're trying to keep everything above of where the new regulations are coming in. We work closely with two attorneys, one who specializes on the peptide side of things and one who is formerly with the FDA. We want to just ensure we're doing everything to the utmost of higher standards of things. And so if there's ever a time that you want to see the C of A's with things, you have questions, we're here through MedShift to support that in any way that we can. We also will be adding in as the demand grows for other things to support the practices, such as SS31. We're all eagerly awaiting for that to release from testing any day now, and to also help you to diversify the peptides in your practice. Many offices and ourselves too have really grown the health of our practices based upon the GLP-1s. But just like our retirement portfolios, it's time to diversify. And this is kind of where it leads into this. We probably have all seen this here, this Trump RX. So what this is, we can look at this a couple different ways, but we have to look at this head on. And with this said, this is, we all need to really diversify things. And so you've acquired these patients on the weight loss side, and now we've got to keep them. And so, that's where Dr. De Silva is going to talk about things like the SS31, the MOTS-C, the Glow Stack that we have. We've got some other new great stack preparations coming, the BPC, the TB500. And so once you've acquired that patient, adding in other preparations. And so the lifetime value of that patient is much longer, and you've got more stick power with them. And so patient acquisition costs, could be anywhere between $50 and $500, depending on where your practice is and how you market and all of that. And so we don't want to see those turn. We want to help you and be very supportive to your practices and adding in additional preparations. And with that said, this is where I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Derek De Silva to kind of go through some of these things. Dr. Derek De Silva is our Chief Medical Director. We have got a great medical advisory board that he leads. Dr. De Silva has a practice in New Jersey and also one in Naples, Florida. He's been on the Larry King Show, CNN, ABC News, also very connected with the Real Housewives in New Jersey. But he's been in this space for 40 years now. He also started Common Sense Supplements, which his two boys run now. Very well connected in this space and just a wealth of knowledge. So with that said, I'll turn over to Dr. Derek De Silva.
Sorry about that. So thank you very much, Heather, and Jamie, thank you very much for the invitation. So we're going to take a dive into this. And I've done this presentation for a couple of different groups, but they're mostly sales groups, if you will. And what I want to really focus on here is to get a little bit more clinical. I'm sorry you can't see this, but the way we have this broken out is we have this broken out into energy, and things like joints, aesthetics, and as you can see, the way this is all done, I want to go through each one of these and show you. Oh, here it is. I'm sorry. So this is the way we're going to approach this. And I think this is the way you need to think about what you're doing in your practice. And folks, as Heather said, as we get more research, as we get more data, the therapeutic benefits of peptides are tremendous. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are already using peptides, but for those of you that may be relatively new, and for those of you that even have been doing this a long time, here's the analogy that I use with my patients. A lot of them, I had a gentleman who came in today. He owns this huge hair salon here in New Jersey. And by the way, as Heather, thank you for that introduction and that background. I see patients in New Jersey and I see patients in Florida and have the good fortune of traveling all over the world and doing these educational programs and educating physicians. The biggest question comes to me is, what's a peptide? Here's the way you look at a peptide. I am a huge car enthusiast, and one of my favorite vehicles is Mercedes-Benz. Always been very loyal to them. And I use this analogy. You go into a dealership or you go into a parking lot where there are 50 different Mercedes Benzes or whatever brand is in the showroom. You know that they're all the same brand. They're peptides, if you will. But there's a C class, there's an E class, there's an S class, there's the G Wagon, there's the GLE, which are the SUVs. But each one of them looks different and has different features inside the vehicle, the car, that you may be looking for. But the question is, how do you differentiate? How do you separate? But here's the key. The key is that each vehicle has an individual key that opens the vehicle to give you what you want, the look, the options, the features, etc. So let's look at something like energy and longevity. Let's say that that is the E class. Okay. What do you need it for? What do you need? Do you need NAD? Do you need SS31? Do you need MOTS-c? What are the extras that you need? So that's what we're going to get into today. And the way I want you to look at these slides that I'm going to go through over the next couple of minutes is this. If you look here, the NAD, what does it do? It's the cellular battery. We all know that mitochondrial energy is one of the hallmarks of aging. There are 7, 9, and now getting up to 10 and 11 different hallmarks of aging. And what's interesting here, folks, is that quite a few of those hallmarks of aging have a peptide that is associated with those hallmarks. So, for example, one of the hallmarks of aging is loss of cellular energy, mitochondrial dysfunction. Another one is the shortening of the telomeres. So, the activation of telomerase. And we're going to, this is what I like to do, is to draw these and put these together. So the way I want you to look at these slides is this. I want you to look at this and say, okay, this is the fuel. And I'll go back to this because it comes down to energy and longevity. And again, these two very much go together. We know via the Hayflick principle that we used to think that cells had a finite amount of divisions that they would go through, and then they would either become senescent and die, or they just stop functioning. We now know we've disproved the Hayflick principle because we now can re-energize cells. We can give them, we have mitochondrial biogenetic agents, and we have mitochondrial agents that give the cells energy. So how do you look at this? I want you to look at this over here because this is where the clinical use comes in. We all have patients with chronic fatigue. We all have patients that need more mental clarity. I do a lot of BHRT. I do a lot of bioidentical hormones, and putting the hormones together with the peptides and then overlapping and overlaying, I should say, the foundation, which is supplements, and we'll be doing another webinar on that and how to integrate the supplements into this, is this whole thing. So where do we use it? How do we use it? It all comes down to NAD is cellular energy, energy restoration, people with chronic fatigue syndrome, people with brain fog. So you give a woman estrogen, you give her progesterone, you give her testosterone, bioidentical now, but they're still not, the levels are good. Clinically they're doing okay, but they still come back and say, you know what, Dr. De Silva, the brain is not working. I have you on pregnenolone. I've optimized your estrogen. You're sleeping with the progesterone. What do I do? This is where something like NAD could come in. It also has an effect on sirtuins, which are the longevity genes. It has an effect on AMPK. These are all, what does AMPK depend on? AMPK depends on energy. So this whole idea of metabolic support, cognitive support, it's not just one thing. It's all of these pieces together. So once again, NAD comes down to the cellular battery, the mitochondrial function, and the way I use it is in the chronic fatigue syndrome patients, the patients that come in and say, I need more mental acuity, this is where I go with this. Let's skip to SS31. And folks, this is quickly becoming one of my favorites. The reason it is becoming one of my favorites is because I have recently been reading, and I have a patient who is in renal failure. His GFR is between 16 and 18. So he's still making urine. His creatinine is around 3.4, 3.5. And, he just, I saw him, in fact, this weekend in Florida, and he said to me, Dr. De Silva, I don't want to go on dialysis. What can I do? So I started doing some homework and I always want to understand the why. Why is SS31 going to be, I think, one of the biggest peptides when it comes to renal insufficiency? Here's why. And this is a paper that I found. I don't remember the exact place, but I remember reading the whole paper. What SS31 does, and the way this works, is that it stabilizes cardiolipin. If you stabilize cardiolipin, and we all know that if we measure high levels of anti-cardiolipin antibodies, what do we see in these patients? We see all kinds of metabolic dysfunction. So stabilizing the cardiolipin membrane in the renal vasculature, in all of the renal functions, is why we improve the effects of renal insufficiency. So you're going to see a huge push for those patients, not only with cardiac issues, but with renal issues. And the reason this is working and the reason this is going to work is because of the stabilization of cardiolipin, the cardiolipin membrane. So what this does is that it repairs the damaged mitochondria. Now, that word repairs is important versus giving it this critical coenzyme. We all look at these as cellular energy nutrients, but they're different. It's like looking at an antioxidant, vitamin C, vitamin E, selenium, beta carotene, coenzyme Q10. They're all antioxidants, but they do different things. So when you look at NAD, you look at this as a critical coenzyme. When you look at SS31, you look at this as something, as this peptide that repairs the damaged mitochondria by stabilizing the cardiolipin membrane. So restoring their inner membrane structure, allowing them to perform the way they're supposed to perform. Not only are we giving gasoline with something like NAD, we are now redoing part of the engine. So cellular repair is what SS31 really does. Reducing oxidative stress. Anything that reduces oxidative stress is obviously going to have a better effect. Organ health, right? Kidneys, liver, eyes. The cardiolipin membrane is a very critical part of the kidneys and the heart, but also in other parts of the body. And then resilience improves the body ability to recover from metabolic stress. Who's this for? This is kind of a no-brainer, right? We look at kidney disease, we look at heart disease, we look at various other metabolic issues, because like metabolic syndrome, and then the elderly patient, the patients with mitochondrial decline. And by the way, I'm sure a lot of you know this, but we're now able to measure mitochondrial function. We can do serum testing to measure mitochondrial function. So one of the things I want to do is to, okay, we've got the patient, I'm just going to use a rough number. On a scale of 0 to 100, your 100 is the best. Mitochondrial function is 20. Let's say somebody has an EF of 20%. Okay, what's going to happen when we give them SS31? What is going to happen not only to their ejection fraction, but what's going to happen to their GFR? What's going to happen to the antibodies? Are we going to be able to knock out some of the anticardiolipin antibodies and stabilize and repair that membrane? And I think this is where the clinical piece is going. So this is how I want you to really look at this when it comes to targeting therapies, because this is what we're coming to, right? I mean, we are getting to the point of real precision medicine, and the peptides definitely play a significant role in that. And again, these are some of the studies that I wanted to show you, and we've got much more, but I want to show you that this information is out there. What about MOTS-c? Again, this is another peptide, but this peptide is different. Metabolic fitness in a bottle. It basically mimics exercise. So it's a mitochondrial derived peptide that mimics the metabolic effects of exercise. The metabolic effects of exercise, regulating glucose and insulin sensitivity directly in muscle tissue. What I'd like to see here is if we are mimicking exercise, my guess is, and now I measure insulin levels. I measure insulin levels on everybody. I particularly measure insulin levels on anybody that comes in that I even think of a GLP-1. Because if your insulin levels are elevated, insulin is a lipogenic substance. You will never get this person to lose weight or lose weight when it comes to metabolically becoming stable if their insulin levels are elevated. So I want that baseline. And if it mimics exercise, okay, what I'm starting to see is those levels do come down. Patients struggling with weight loss plateaus. You use the GLP-1s, all of a sudden they hit that plateau. Don't forget, and this is just an aside, but don't forget to make sure that their protein levels are optimal. Don't forget to make sure that their gut's functioning the way it should. Don't forget to give them the omega-3s, the probiotics, because all of these become part of this. And as I said in the beginning, we're going to be doing a webinar on how you can put all of these pieces together. Because quite honestly, folks, 20 years ago, I was not able to do this. The reason is because now we have the tools to overlay. Let's say we start with the supplements, the probiotics, the vitamin D, the omega-3s, etc., CoQ10. We can overlay the hormones. We can overlay peptides. Don't forget diet, exercise, etc. But this is where the puzzle now starts to take effect, right? We can start to see the picture because we are starting to understand a lot of the pieces. Patients struggling with weight loss plateaus, patients with metabolic syndrome, those pre-diabetic people, women with that postmenopausal shift where they're running out of energy. Athletes, exercise mimicking, fat loss, insulin sensitivity, increasing insulin sensitivity, and endurance. So all of these, we go back to this, and all of these fit under energy, but each one has a very specific effect. Okay, I'm sure every one of you that are on here knows BPC. I personally use it. I play competitive tennis, and this is something that is a must for me after I get done playing. I would much rather use BPC 157 than take an Advil or an ibuprofen or something else that's going to perhaps raise my blood pressure and damage my kidneys or my liver. So, what does this do? Body protection compound, that's what the BPC stands for. Accelerated healing from the inside out. Why? Why are we saying from the inside out? Why? Because BPC 157 is something that is found, is a peptide that is found in the gut. It is found in the gut, it's produced in the gut, and it repairs the gut. We all know that if the gut is not healthy, folks, nothing else is going to work. So, accelerated healing from the inside out. A peptide derived from gastric juices that dramatically accelerates the healing of soft tissue. So, I slipped and fell on the tennis court the other day and going for a volley. My partner was coming up. I thought he was a little further back than he was, and I ran right into him, twisted my ankle, went down on my elbow, and boy, I'll tell you, my right elbow was sore. And I really thought I busted my ankle or I tore all the ligaments. Fortunately, I was able to get up and move. As soon as I got home, as soon as I got home, I did the BPC. And a day later, a day and a half later, I mean, I'm set to play tennis in another 2 days again. So the repair, the recovery from the trauma is just monumental. Rapid tissue repair. Sprains, tears, and surgeries. It's exactly what this is for. Healing the gut, reducing inflammation. It's an anti-inflammatory, and it supports the joints. So athletes, the other place that I really use this is IBS Crohn's disease or any gut issues. So IBS Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis. Those are inflammatory conditions within the gut. You stabilize the inflammation from the inside out. I also use a good probiotic. I use omega-3s to reduce the inflammation. And you combine this. Now I have something else that I can use to give my patients that have these issues. So as you can see here, this is something that a lot of people could use because a lot of people have the inflammation. A lot of people have all kinds of issues there. TB500 or TA4, this is what we like to call this is the systemic healing and flexibility peptide. It's the recovery accelerator. It's a synthetic form of thymosin beta 4 that promotes rapid tissue regeneration, reduces inflammation, improves flexibility by preventing scar and tissue formation. Now, there is, and I'll show you this in a little bit, a real synergy between BPC and TB5 and TA4, or excuse me, TB4. There's the synergy between this and how they work and how they form the scaffolding to work on with the other is incredible. Athletes prone to muscle tears, patients recovering from surgery, individuals with chronic joint stiffness. So the osteoarthritis, the rheumatoid arthritis, the elderly that have trouble walking because of stiffness, this is who this is for. Accelerated healing drastically shortens the recovery times of muscle tears and injuries. Flexibility. One of the other things that I think we need to pay attention to as clinicians is fibrous tissue. Folks, not enough of us pay attention to fibrous tissue and maintaining range of motion by stretching. I see people going out to exercise. I see people jumping on the tennis court and no stretching, no warm up. This is where injuries get set up. There's one thing that I would like for you to take away is when you talk to your patients, make sure that they're aware of this fibrous tissue. And one of the best things that you can do to improve the flexibility of the fibrous tissue besides TB4 is what? It's water. If you are dry, you are going to tear your tissues. And I tell my patients this all the time. You can take all the peptides in the world you want, but don't forget the simple things, and that's things like water. Flexibility, cardiac protection. You know, you would never think of this being cardioprotective, but it has an angiogenic effect. Travels throughout the body, targeting inflammation. So athletes, people recovering from surgery, chronic joint stiffness, older adults seeking better mobility. And again, you will mostly see, and we'll get into this in a little bit when we talk about the Wolverine stack, the TB 500 and the BPC together. So this, I'm going to come back to this I'm sorry you can't see these references there, but I want to talk to this and then we'll go back to the other one. So again, a lot of you probably know about the Wolverine stack, which is the BPC 157 and the TB 500. So how do they work together? And I like to look at this as a 1 + 1 = 3, because combining them creates a much stronger, a much better peptide than using either one of these alone. The BPC, and this is how this gets really awesome. The BPC builds the scaffolding, and the TB500 mobilizes the repair cells. Remember, you always need a foundation in order to build whatever it is you want to heal. And that's exactly what happens here. Is that the BPC is involved in the scaffolding, excuse me, and the TB500 is the one that mobilizes and repairs the cells. So it's 1 + 1 = 3. And this is what we call the Wolverine stack. So major surgery recovery, any of the pro athletes, I am certain that all of the pro athletes that have, after a game where you're getting beat up, and by the way, congratulations to the Seattle Seahawks. Uh, any of these guys that get beat up like this, they have to be using this. They absolutely have to be using this. ACL tears, rotator cuff tears, spinal fusions, athletes that really can't afford downtime, muscle tears, tendon ruptures, chronic issues that haven't responded. This is the combo that we want to use. All right. Designed for the fastest possible return to activity. Let's go back to this, the glow stack. So this is a combination of the BPC 157, the TB 500, and the copper. The three of these working together is an inside out repair. Heals internal tissue and also amplifies collagen, amplifies elastin with the copper. The amount of healing, I think it's a 60 or 70% acceleration of collagen building with copper. And you're not going to find that anywhere else. Plastic surgery, for anybody that does any kind of aesthetic procedures, this is golden. This is absolutely golden. And putting all of these three together is what we really, really want to do when it comes to aging, any aesthetic practices, etc. So if you're doing a lot of aesthetics, if you're doing, let's say, hormones, the peptides that I just discussed with the SS31, the BPC, the TB500, etc., these are just a no-brainer for you. They absolutely are. And again, I'm sorry I couldn't see those references. Okay. This is the other problem area, and that is visceral fat. We all know that visceral fat is an active endocrine organ that doesn't do a lot of good things. So we need to get rid of visceral fat. Again, when I see my hormone patients, the women that come in that have the estrogen dominance, they have the midline bulge, if you will. A lot of that, if you look at this, they also have visceral fat. It is one of the most popular growth hormone releasing compounds that are available, specifically FDA approved to reduce visceral adipose fat. This was first looked at in HIV patients and is now used for body composition. So who benefits from this? The beer belly, right? The people with the belly. And by the way, these are also the people, and I'm talking specifically about men. These are also the men that are going to aromatize. They're going to convert their testosterone to estrogen. They're going to develop the man boobs, as we call them, the belly. And this is where tesamorelin comes in. We can cut that back. So we can even look at this, and I use this with my patients that I have trouble with the beer belly that are on hormones. I don't want them to aromatize. And by the way, I don't use prescription aromatase inhibitors. I use something like DIM, diindolylmethane. Diindolylmethane is phenomenal for that. I don't need to get into the prescription drugs for that. And then I add some tesamorelin on top of that, and boom, you're again, I like to use the word golden. You're golden. So getting rid of visceral fat, that stubborn abdominal fat, giving you more muscle definition, improving the cardiovascular system, reducing carotid intimal media thickness, which is again arterial plaque, and again cognitive function, improving clarity, improving cognitive function. So you can see the benefits here of something like tesamorelin. Ipamorelin. Ipamorelin, once again, and if we back up here, and I want to make sure you understand this, if we back up here, we look at tesamorelin, we look at ipamorelin, increase growth hormone levels, body composition, and metabolism. All right. And you also want to make sure that you're not overlapping a lot of these so that they become redundant. But let me go back to here. The ipamorelin is a starter peptide. Folks, this is one of the safest and effective recovery hormone supports that you can do. Selective growth hormone secretagogue that stimulates natural growth hormone, releases pulse in a pulsatile manner, mimicking the body's natural rhythm without affecting cortisol and the hunger hormones. So what does that mean? A lot of times when you give, let's say, growth hormone, what are you going to do? You're going to raise cortisol. You're going to raise your I'm drawing a blank on the hormones. You're going to raise the hunger hormones. And what's going to happen? You're going to continue, you're going to eat, and you're going to end up what? Gaining weight. This does not do that. It does not raise ghrelin. It does not have an effect on ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone, at all. So you don't start to gain weight. In fact, what you will do It's a very simple way to just calm your body down. It's better for sleep. It's very good for people that are prone to anxiety, etc., because it doesn't have an effect on cortisol. All right. One of the safest things that you can do. Your sleep is better. Why? Cortisol is improved. Enhanced recovery. Body composition with no side effects, no hunger spikes, no spikes of ghrelin, and no spikes of cortisol. Because if we stimulate cortisol, what's the other thing that's going to happen? The other thing that's going to happen is insulin. Insulin is also now going to go up. So targeted areas, as you can see here, the sleep cycles, cellular repair, and the pituitary gland. But this is where I want you to keep an eye on where you can be used, patients that are prone to anxiety. This is wonderful. Ipamorelin wonderful for that. CJC 1295. Again, this is long-acting, long-lasting growth hormone support. It's an analog that provides sustained release of growth hormone and IGF-1 levels over several days rather than a boom, just a spike. Patients wanting fewer injections. Some people, I particularly don't like a lot of needles, so I try to minimize it. Those seeking consistent IGF-1 levels, by you raise IGF-1, you're going to raise growth hormone. Athletes that are focused on muscle building because you're raising growth hormone, and patients also with issues with sleep. So sustained release versus a fast release, deeper sleep, muscle growth, and then fat loss. All right. When you look at the mechanisms of how all of these work, it is just absolutely amazing. Let's go into the natural growth hormone optimizers. So, Samorlin. You know, Samorlin for me is one of the, if you will, entry level peptide patients. Patients seeking general anti-aging, looking for that youthful feel, patients with mild fatigue, with things like sleep issues. Again, a very gentle way to break people into the whole peptide world. It's a growth hormone releasing hormone analog that stimulates the pituitary gland to naturally produce its own growth hormone, preventing the body's natural feedback loops. So, again, mimicking what your body does. That's what we want to do. We want to mimic what the body does on all levels. This is why I love BHRT, because it's mimicking what the body knows. If the body knows it and recognizes it, then it's going to utilize it in a better way. Here's another way, and I know I'm running a little bit over here, but here's another way I want you to look at peptides. And I don't take credit for this. I have to credit this to Dr. Luis Martinez. And I heard him say this at one of the conferences that we did together in Puerto Rico. He said, the way you need to look at peptides is this. As you get older, you start to lose your hormones. So you're a perimenopausal woman, you're a menopausal woman, you're an andropausal male. What's happening? The hormones, your biologic hormones are starting to dip. And folks, the same thing happens with the peptides. So not only do we have a hormone deficiency, we have a peptide deficiency. And again, it is all a result of aging. We can now change the engine. We can put better energy into the engine. We can make the engine work better. We can mimic what the body does with these hormones. And Samorlin, once again, restorative sleep, increased vitality, skin health, increasing skin elasticity, texture, and tone. And it's very safe. And also, it's a great way to get people started. What about the brain? What about the brain? Let's not forget the brain, because that's one of the things that people are frightened about. Their skin, their energy, and I think the number one thing that people are afraid of is losing their brain. The cognitive enhancer, laser focus, mental clarity. That's what CMAX is all about. A potent neurotropic peptide that increases BDNF. If you increase BDNF and you protect your neurons, you're significantly going to improve and enhance the performance and your memory. And that's what this is all about. Mental clarity, people with brain fog. So, this is the other thing. I've given you estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, pregnenolone, and you're still having issues with focus, concentration. This is where CMAX comes in. But again, this is something you can start with. You can start with in that 40-year-old, the perimenopausal woman, the periandropausal male. These are all other tools that you can use. Patients with ADHD like symptoms, post-stroke, TBI recovery patients, people with the brain fog, executives that need high performance. All of these, why? Because what you're doing here, it increases BDNF. And if you increase BDNF, you're going to protect the neurons and your brain is going to perform better. One other thing don't forget, and that is sleep. What does sleep do? Sleep will rev up the glymphatic system for cleaning and cleansing. So sleep also becomes an extremely important piece and is part of a lot of these peptides. It's neuroprotective and also mood elevating and enhancing. And Selenac, the anti-anxiety peptide, this is another one that's good for people with anxiety, patients withdrawing from alcohol and benzos. It's calm, focus without sedation. Patients with generalized anxiety disorder, Selenac is wonderful. High stress professionals, people that are just burning the candles at both ends, like probably a lot of you on here. You need more calm. You need more focus. Anxiety relief, mental clarity, sleep, non sedating. But I think the big thing here is if you've got those patients with alcohol, with benzo issues that need to just bring it down a notch, this is where the Selenac comes in. And again, copper, I believe this is the last one because otherwise I'm running out of time. Copper, which is the beauty and repair peptide. If you said to somebody, I can increase your collagen by 70%, reducing wrinkles and improving elasticity, who's going to say no to that? I'm not going to say no to that. And your patients are not going to say no to that. It's a natural occurring copper peptide that stimulates collagen production, repairs DNA, and acts as a very powerful anti-inflammatory agent for skin and tissue. Again, 70% increase in collagen, reducing wrinkles and improving elasticity. I don't know anything that does that. If you're using lasers, if you've got an aesthetic practice, this is absolutely golden in there. Hair follicles increases the hair thickness and growth, accelerates the repair of skin and connective tissue, and neutralizes free radicals to prevent cellular aging. But once again, this is all about skin, hair, and tissue. This is all about reducing wrinkles and improving elasticity. But there's a big but here. The but here is it has other benefits. This is the beauty of these peptides. You will say, I want to use this for my skin, hair, and tissue, but it has other antioxidative effects. It has other tissue repairing effects. So it isn't just that one thing. And then, of course, PT141, it is the peptide that does not work on the vascular system. It works on the central nervous system, on the hypothalamus to stimulate sexual desire and arousal. All right. And it's been approved, by the way, it's boosts sexual desire in both men and women. Treats ED where Viagra, Cialis have failed. Its dosing is 1 to 4 milligrams as needed. Start low, go slow. Also approved by the FDA for female arousal. And also, the action, once again, is not vascular, it's central. It's central. And I'll be able to get into this a little bit more. I apologize for going a little bit longer than I should have, but there was a lot there. So we'll get into much more detail on those other ones in the very near future. Thank you very much, folks.
Fantastic. We didn't have any questions that came in, but that's okay. If there are questions that come up, just please direct them to the MedShift team. We would be happy to take care of those, whether that's a clinical question or it's formulary or on production. And then I always learn some great things from Dr. De Silva. And, I thought I would share too. So I personally have been doing peptides myself for probably 15 years now. Samorelin we used to be able to do GHRP2 and GHRP6. And then now we have available tesamorelin, CJC, hugely beneficial for me. I always see great sleep with those. I also personally love the MOTS-C. I take that twice a week, 5 milligrams of that one. I take NAD all the time. That's one of my favorites that I add in 50 to 100 milligrams of that, as compliant as I can be when I'm not traveling. And then I microdose some of the GLP ones. Anyway,
Well, I've
that's
traveled, Heather and I have traveled to many places, and she's always up and ready to go. I have to tell you that, folks. She's always up and ready to go. So, yeah, they're working, Heather, believe me.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun what we do. Oh, and then the best one I think that we have in here for females, because we don't want downtime from lasers and all of that stuff, is that GHK copper CU for building the collagen. So we all need that.
I just
Any questions, folks? We're happy to answer any. I got plenty of time. I'm home, so I'm just gonna eat dinner soon. Nothing.
we did have I saw a couple things coming through the Q&A.
Sure.
Um, and
Oh,
yes,
here we go.
the recording is going to be available. That's correct. And we will provide that. But there were also a couple questions about 503As, 503Bs, and why practices are having a tough time finding some of these peptides from 503A and 503B pharmacies. Can you elaborate a little bit more on why that is?
Yeah, so I'll go into that a little bit. So around 2.5 years ago, the FDA reclassified a lot of these peptides. So there's category 1, 2, and 3. And they put a lot of these peptides on the category 2. So that was the BPC, the CJC. So essentially, peptides could be nominated. Any specific peptide could be nominated by a pharmacist or pharmacy and submit in some supporting clinical data. And it would essentially go up on a whiteboard with the FDA. Many of these things were up there for over a decade and never looked at. Then we have a situation where company pharmacies are making semaglutide and tirzepatide. When that started happening, of course, we're, hardly taking a bite out of the business with Lilly and Novo, but, we know that they're great friends, right? So, the FDA and big pharma. And so one of the ways that they could take one big swoop at the compounding pharmacy industry as a whole was to reclassify a lot of those peptides. So at that time, it was over 20 peptides. I've never seen anything like that, but over 20 peptides were reclassified and put on that Cat 2, which then meant that compounding pharmacies could not make them. That would be 503A, which is patient specific. 503B compounding pharmacies have a very limited formulary as to what they're allowed to produce. It has to be things that have either commercially available and on a drug shortage. So that's where they were able to do the GLP ones, things that are already approved by the FDA on their list of category ones, or something, let's say it is for epidural or intrathecal use to be used specifically in clinic. And that's where, you have a few pharmacies that are out there that are still willing to do these category twos. Not many of them. It's really difficult to find that, and it's difficult to find a pharmacy who's doing it right in that way. There are a few prices are often a little bit higher, and so that's why we're just trying to provide access. I do see another question here. Can you provide legitimate pharmacies? You'd have to do your own due diligence in where you're located to see if pharmacies, if that pharmacy is willing to ship into your state. The
Heather,
reporting.
I want to say one thing here. I
Mhm.
got into a lot of the clinical detail, the disease states, et cetera, that I talked about today are not something that I discuss outside a physician webinar. That's something that's very specific. This type of webinar, just as an FYI, is not for the public. It's not for people that are not professionals. So when we start to talk about disease states, and I talk about kidney disease, heart disease, etc., those these type of discussions are directed specifically to physicians. Okay, this is not a patient or consumer webinar. I'm sorry, Heather. I just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you. And that goes into a little bit of some of these other questions too. And so dosing, MedShift does have some dosing guidelines for you that they can share. Again, dosing is going to be very patient specific, but they do have some guidelines that they can give you on a typical range as well as reconstitution. There's another question here about allergic reaction to these peptides. Patients should not be allergic to any of these. Sometimes patients can build up some antibodies to that, and they can have an injection site reaction, is what you often will see a little bit more. It's more commonly seen with anything that's in that growth hormone category. Probably the one that we hear of it the most is actually Simorelin, and that was a commercially available drug. All of these other things, peptides are just simply amino acid sequences. There should be nothing in there that they should be having an issue with.
I want,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, go
Heather,
ahead.
I
I'll
want to
take this
answer
over.
this question
Yeah.
about what labs should we check and what about cancer. Anybody with active cancer, anybody you're suspicious of with cancer, don't do it. You're just asking for trouble. Now, we will get into, and I believe one of our board members will be doing a webinar specifically on cancer. So that's not something that I would advise any of you that don't have a good background in dealing with peptides to even get into. Just don't go there. It's just not smart. What labs should you check, folks? This is again what I tell people, what I tell physicians all the time when I do these type of webinars and courses and things that I teach. You first have to be a good clinician. You have to know how to interpret data. You have to know what an RDW and high RDW means. You have to know how to look at a free T3. You have to know optimal levels of vitamin D, B12, etc. So the basic blood work and a little bit more, if you will, insulin levels, homocysteine levels, ferritin levels, free T3, vitamin D levels, B12 levels. These are just some of the basics. Because if you don't have the right foundation of nutrient optimization, it is going to be very hard to optimize with things like peptides. The peptides, and this is another webinar we're going to do, is the peptides are going to work much better once you've optimized the person metabolically. So, what you usually do is what I suggest you do before, blood work wise, you get into a lot of this. Go ahead.
Dr. De Silva, do you want to answer the one too on being effective oral versus injection?
Where's that?
At the very bottom, so just efficacy on oral peptides versus
Oh,
injectables.
okay. So, again, what I will typically do is the problem with a lot of the oral peptides is this: it has to get through the gut. And the gut has protective mechanisms. And those protective mechanisms are things like the good flora is a very, very, very low pH, the acid that destroys a lot of the peptides. Because remember, folks, peptides are not say very unstable, but they're labile. They can break if you don't reconstitute them properly, et cetera, et cetera. So there are, for example, BPC 157 is wonderful with PEA and KPV, is wonderful taken orally. And I will give it to my patients that have ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, IBS, it's wonderful for that. But there's also a role for the injectables. You're not going to get the same effect with an, if you will, I'm using an extreme example, SS31 as an oral versus SS31 as an injectable. So you have to look at what you're looking at here and what you're trying to achieve. Let me make sure. Uh, can you start any of these peptides before regulating patients' hormones? I think somebody's trying to. This is something that I talk about all the time. Um, you can do them together. You can absolutely do them together. But again, correct the metabolic issues first, and then get into some of the other things. But can you do these together? Absolutely, you can do them together. Heather, is there anything else that?
Yeah, so we will also we'd be happy to have another webinar specifically more on GLPs. We will probably also do a webinar with one of our other physicians on the medical advisory board, Luis Martinez, and have this with Dr. De Silva together. Um, that we'll schedule that through MedShift and a question on production. So our main production facility is in Louisville, Kentucky, and we do distribution from a couple different sites as well as in the Middle East. One question here regarding, do we follow IGF-1 or this has or total glutathione? Let's see.
Well,
So
you
maybe
can,
that's related to any CJC or tesamorelin.
yeah, I mean, you could follow IGF-1 levels, and that's obviously a wonderful thing to do. Uh, I'm a huge fan of glutathione, but glutathione has to be taken correctly, right? Glutathione is another one of those very labile agents, but yeah, you can follow the IGF-1 levels. I think that's probably a better indicator to follow because it'll give you a better idea of what's going on, not only centrally, but also insulin, weight loss, etc. That's all I have here. Anything else here, Heather, that you see?
That's it.
Okay. I can hear my dinner calling, so.
Fantastic. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you so much, Jamie, Dr. De Silva, and MedShift providers. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Silva. Thanks, Heather. And thanks to everybody who joined this evening. Have a great night.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye bye.